This is episode 2 of Thinking Differently series brought to you by Ground Control. Today we're talking with Paul Magda of Pause Coffee House in Sacramento, California. Well, hey everybody, this is Chris DeFurio with Keys to the Shop. I hope you're doing really well today, and welcome to the second episode in a 3-part series on Thinking Differently brought to you by Ground Control. Ground Control is, of course, the makers of the Ground Control Cyclops brewer, which is the most revolutionary brewer to come out in decades. This thing is truly leveling up what you can expect from cafe equipment, not only in its award-winning technology that gives you control over an incredible range of flavors in your batch brew, making your batch brew the best it's ever been, but also in its versatility in that it allows you to make things like tea, hot chocolate, batched iced lattes, and batch cold brew, all from a single machine with a small footprint. It's actually won awards for its design. And on top of that, it's really easy to use and to train your staff on. So if the idea of having a machine that is both versatile and gives you the ability to level up the quality of your products appeals to you, then I highly recommend you go check out the Ground Control brewer for your store. To do that, just visit their website over at groundcontrol.coffee. Well, everyone, again, welcome to the second episode in this Thinking Differently series where we're talking to entrepreneurs who have built their businesses by taking unique steps to build something great for their customers and for their staff. Last week, we talked with Ron from Teofilo Coffee, and this week, we are talking with the co-founder of Pause Coffee in Sacramento, California, Paul Magda. About 6 years ago, Paul and his business partner, Edward, threw around the idea of opening up a cafe, and they committed to the idea right out of the gate. Even though their background is primarily in construction and fabrication and some medical experience, they set about the business of learning the business of coffee and have showed a lot of diligence and constance in the process of not only developing the business, but developing themselves too as leaders. Both Paul and Edward are first-generation immigrants to this country, and as I said, are working diligently every day to make Pause Coffee House the best experience for their staff and their customers possible. When they started Pause Coffee, they took over existing retail operations, and doing so created a steep learning curve for them as they had to manage the business and the people involved in taking something that was already existing and then changing things and improving systems and processes, and like I said, becoming better leaders. We talk a lot in this conversation with Paul about the early days, some of the bigger mistakes that they made, learning how to run a coffee shop, their approach to quality control and constant improvement, also the emphasis on creative problem solving that they have as they had only been open a short time before COVID hit, and threw down for them what Paul calls a real test of their authenticity as leaders and of the vision itself. So we get to learn a lot from Paul today about personal and operational improvements and how to navigate change within the structure of a business while considering the people in that business as well. So I'm really excited for the content today. Don't forget, again, we have our bonus episode, which is available over at groundcontrol.coffee/KTTS for Keys to the Shop. So that's groundcontrol.coffee/KTTS, and you can find the bonus episode with Paul as we continue our conversation along these lines, and you won't want to miss that. So without further ado, here now is my conversation on Thinking Differently with Paul Magda of Pause Coffee House. Well, Paul, welcome to Keys to the Shop. Excited to get to hear your story and talk to you today. How's it going?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me on this morning, Chris.
Yeah, pleasure. So Pause Coffee, your business story is pretty interesting. We were talking about it before hitting record here. I wonder if you could just start by talking a little bit about how you got up to speed in doing this, because it took a little bit of time to get where you are right now, or to even to the point where you opened the coffee shop. I mean, really, what drew you into this, and what was the process of actualizing this idea?
Growing up, I always knew I wanted to do something in business. I grew up in a family where business was just what we did, and trying to kind of find my way going about it, try to go to school and do all that. But I always found myself doing other things on the side. Fast forward a few years, into my, young adult life, talking to my partner about potentially starting a business, and coffee just so happened to be I think one of the things a lot of people fall in is like, hey, I want to open up a business. Don't know much about it, but a coffee shop seems like it's easy. Let's do it. That's how it kind of started for us.
Okay, so when the idea happened, that's one thing, but actualizing that idea, putting it into practice, starting the process, some people will go from idea to concept, or open really quickly, but you all took a little bit longer.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know what we were doing, right? So we made tons of mistakes up front that cost time, and figuring out the whole capital thing is a big thing that takes up a lot of time, because you have a great idea in your head. How do you sell that idea? How do you raise the capital to get you by until you can develop a profitable, sustainable business to keep you moving forward? And so, that part was pretty difficult first few years. It's like, well, you have some money saved up that we thought was going to be enough. We dumped all that in, and that wasn't nearly enough. And so you're so far committed, and you have to get very creative and resourceful to make up for the difference.
Okay, so when you guys realized that it wasn't going to be enough, you obviously had to raise funds, like you're saying, and you said you made a lot of mistakes. I guess that's one of them, is undercapitalizing, right? So eventually you got to the place where you could actually open, and you got enough money to invest into it. I mean, really, besides that, what were some of the other challenges that you had in getting this thing open?
So trying to understand, thinking you can do it by yourself, right? That was, I think, one very big thing that was evident right off the bat. Besides the whole capital thing, right, is you need people to help you, because you can't do everything yourself. And I think that was one misconception we had. And you quickly find out, like I said, that you need help. And how do you get people to be willing to help you in what you're trying to do when you don't have, any experience in any of these fields, really? And people, I think they judge you in a sense, where they say, hey, this guy doesn't have his stuff together. And so with that comes a lot of frustrations, both for you and them, and they decide to leave. And so it was a while before we kind of had some kind of stability in place where employees weren't disgruntled and didn't just leave. So we can actually start working and developing a real business.
Was this happening before you were open, or after you're open?
After. So after we opened up our cafe, it was a unique situation because my partner and I really had no experience in any type of leadership or business management, or really understanding a lot of these attributes that are a must to build a successful business.
But you were also, from what I understand, you were taking over an existing space that had been a coffee shop. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in March of 2018, actually, we're coming up on our third birthday here.
Hey.
So in a few days here, exciting. We started our original cafe, and a couple years in, we found another existing cafe that was, we noticed some underdeveloped areas about it, saw its potential, and the owner and I had a mutual friend, and I reached out to him. I said, hey, would this person be interested in kind of getting rid of the business or selling it, or anything about that? And so I got in touch with the owner. 6 weeks later, we acquired the cafe, and that was in February of last year, of 2020, literally about 5-6 weeks before COVID hit. And then 6 weeks in or so, COVID hit, and just been kind of pivoting ever since.
So you really didn't have a very long history of like running a coffee business before COVID hit, and now you're having to learn how to deal with that on top of learning how to be leaders in coffee. Because you said this coffee business because you wanted to be an entrepreneur, but some of the requirements of being a leader to the staff were also, it was a learning curve for you all. So it seems like too simple to say, well, tell me about that. But I mean,
Right.
at the point where COVID hit, I imagine y'all had grown a fair bit as leaders in the business. Where were you at in terms of your staff and your own understanding of leadership when COVID hit, and how did that help you in the process of dealing with COVID?
Yeah, so I think building the business up until right before COVID hit is, you face a lot of adversity right off the bat. I think any true vision is going to be tested for authenticity, and it'll be tested often. And so it was, a couple years of that prior to COVID is just getting hit with challenges day in and day out, and that was kind of the mindset and kind of that's what I was thinking, or that was like my mindset is like, all right, well, we just looked at it like another challenge that comes up, every day. There's something new that develops that presents a challenge as you're growing or developing or pivoting or doing something creative. And so I think the most important thing was just not having a negative reaction. Is just staying calm. Okay, well, let's see how this plays out. Let's tone it down for a little bit and kind of see how both people and how the world's reacting, what's going to happen. And I think that was one thing I learned prior to COVID about leadership that really helped us, because leadership, I think, it's visual, right? And so people see that you're calm in this, terrible pandemic, and people are influenced by that. And so they kind of hold their own, if I can say, and just kind of look to you to lead and see what we're going to do moving forward.
It's interesting taking over an existing space because there's a community that surrounds that space before you come in. And were some of what your experiences were with, learning about leadership and, having some people leave in the beginning, was some of that related to simply changing the way things were done in an existing culture, in an existing business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's important to understand kind of the layout and how things work and operate in the world. And when there is change, naturally people are resistant to it. And our whole intention coming in this, our second cafe was to make improvements where we saw were necessary. And so the staff, I think, appreciated that because they were very underdeveloped. The cafe was very underdeveloped. Really no management systems or just basic operating systems weren't in place that made the job very frustrating both for the employees at the time and customers, because there was, inconsistencies and, and everything that has to do with, a bad experience. And we wanted to fix that where we saw one play that was big where we can improve, because that's what we've been doing these last couple years at our original cafe, right? And there was some fallout, I guess you can say. But it was kind of hard to tell because COVID hit literally 6 weeks in or so, and this was an underperforming cafe, and so we decided to shut this one down for a bit and focus our resources, time, and energy at our Fair Oaks Cafe, which is a lot busier than our second cafe.
The question I have here then is, when you came into this, you were kind of new to coffee and you're taking over an existing business, but then you wanted to make changes with both cafes, right? You're bringing in changes, right, and really asking people to do things differently. You have different standards. Where did that come from? Because you could easily have come in and said, wow, this will be a cakewalk. We could just kind of do what they were doing this whole time and have a coffee shop. Boom, we're business owners, right? But what made you want to make things different? Where did that come from?
So I think that stems from a core value that my partner and I have, that has kind of spilled into really our lives, both professionally and personally. It's like something that we see that can be improved, try to improve it. And we try to be 1% better every day. Whole compound effect. If you're just doing 1% better every day, the effect compounds at some point, right?
Right.
And I think the farther you can push that out, the farther you can hang on and be 1% better every day. And, you don't see those like improvements on the day to day per se, but over time it compounds. And so I think we came to realize that after we had brought Onyx as our exclusive roaster, right? They were definitely, I think, a source of inspiration for like what we want to do. They've been able to accomplish so much in so little time, and it's been an incredible like thing to see them grow. Just in the last like 3 years that we've had a business relationship, they align themselves with the mindset of never settling for good enough, right? And similarly, we definitely strive to be 1% better every day, which in turn, that does not allow you to settle for good enough. So Onyx has definitely been a great source of inspiration as we grow from our infancy period to the next stages of the business.
Really interesting. When you're trying to be 1% better every day, obviously you have a vision for what you want to eventually get to. So there's some restraint that's involved, if I'm reading that right. So you might be inspired by, and I'd be interested to know where your inspiration comes from in terms of your goals and setting goals for the business. But, if you have a goal, you say, well, I eventually, through the compound effect, want to get to this place. Saying 1% better does show some restraint on your end to not just try and, steamroll the process and force it to happen. So where, I guess, to encapsulate that rambling thought of my own, where does that inspiration come from in terms of your goals for the business, and how do you manage your own energies so that it's not overwhelming people, but is kind of a restrained, gradual, and consistent process towards that goal?
So I had to quickly learn that things don't move at a pace that we want them to move, right? When we first started off, working with people, managing people, understanding, the dynamics of relationships and how important they are in the professional work. My partner and I are very, I think, ambitious, and we'd like to push very hard. And me being in the operation day to day, I quickly realized that not everybody moves at that pace. And so I had to kind of slow down the drive a little bit, and kind of meet people where they're at, right? It's this whole going back to the notion of understanding and knowing that you can't do it all yourself. You need people, so you have to understand how to work with people. First, gain their respect, right? And so you can lead them to this area where you're trying to go. If you force, right? If you push really hard, if you force people, because you can't expect people to work 120-hour work weeks, 100-hour work weeks, whatever it takes to get to where you're trying to go. I don't think we necessarily have like, hey, in a year we need to be here. In 5 years we need to be here. But what we need to do today is continually improve. And our goal is to just improve every single day. I'm betting that that'll take us to areas where a lot of people can't go to, because it's very difficult to have and do the things that improve yourself 1% every day. Not just your operation, but personally, right? Developing yourself as a leader, as a communicator, as a manager, as a, all these attributes, I think, are very important to having a successful business.
Right. Now, when you're talking about making these improvements, as you've been doing that, what areas do you find in the business that you're making the most improvements to? When you say, I want to get better, specifically, what areas have you seen the most improvements in, and where have you been focusing most of your energy where you say, see, this is working. We're getting better and better at this or that. What are those areas for you?
Sure. So, for example, most recently, we had, I think, about 5 different flavor options on our menu for our lattes. And as a management team, we sat down and said, hey, how can we make this better? And we decided that if we cut 2 of the least popular ones and focus on developing our best sellers and our most popular items, developing them better, we can improve the overall experience because you can execute better, you can manage it easier, and just the overall operation is smoother. So that's, I think, one like more recent, like specific example of us trying to improve and become better.
Yeah, and as you're improving one area, obviously, you're going to see how it's interconnected with all the other areas too, because I'll bet that, it helps the staff feel better when they're working, customers feel better when they're ordering. You feel better because you're not wasting money on something that doesn't sell, which is not great for an operation. So I imagine with most things that you put your hand to improve, you're going to see how it touches a lot of other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was, we look at it, like the front of house, right? Like I mentioned, the whole latte deal and all the different flavors and whatnot, and also spending time developing the actual business and the operation, which is something that I more recently had the time to kind of step away from, like day to day, I guess you could say, operations, and kind of start working on making the business as a whole better.
So the back end of things, that is the foundation for what we see in the cafe, which is the end product, but the thing that actually helps people get consistent paychecks and schedules and, job descriptions and things like that, right?
Precisely. Yeah. I mean, we kind of did it backwards, right? We didn't have any of that in place when we first started because, like I said earlier, you just don't know. You're just young and ambitious, and you just want to do something. And so, none of those procedural, like very important foundational things, were there, and that caused a lot of frustration in the beginning and contributed to much turnover and all the fun stuff that a young business experiences in the first probably 3 years, I'd say, where it's most crucial, where I think a lot of businesses die in that time because of that.
You're right, because they are looking at the front end, and if you have all the equipment and the menu and the space and the location and that stuff, it should work, right? But there's that glue that holds it together is that operational element it's not as pretty to look at, but it's necessary.
I'd argue that stuff it's important, but it's I don't want to say irrelevant because that's what you do, right? You do coffee, but it's, if you want to take it to the next level, like those kinds of things you can't be working on, you have to be developing the operation, the business, pushing it further, driving the vision, finding people that have the potential, seeing the potential in people. And those are the things that I more recently started working on, rather than like, hey, I got to go cover a lunch, or hey, I got to go get this or go get that because we're running low because our system's not good,
Oh, yeah.
Finally, I think close to that threshold where it's like, all right, all these things are closely, like pretty much in place. Now I feel like it's ground zero and I can get to work.
Which a lot of people might be of the mindset, now I can relax. Yeah, because I'm not, required to go get milk or be on bars. So now and then the same thing happens where it kind of creeps back and things collapse. So kudos to you for like digging in and leaning into that, because that is the lifeblood of a business. I'm curious, now that you've made you've made all these changes, and you have you're leaning into your systems, and you've got what I imagine now is a solid crew of people. What do you hope people experience when they walk into your store, and what are some of the tools that you've employed in the store end of things, where the baristas are and where the coffee experience happens, that really you feel sets you apart?
So tools, I think, are very important to complete and execute a job as best as you can, right? And so we try to equip our staff as best as we can with the best tools that there are, because that, I think, allows you to execute as best as you can in your job, right? So if you have, a good grinder, you can execute phenomenally and pull a great shot, right? Which leads to a good experience for the customer and a good experience for the barista because they have a happy customer. And so it's like this, I think, like snowballing effect, just having the correct equipment to do the job.
And when you're talking about equipping people, it's, again, back to the operations also, because that's your role, in a sense, like as an owner, to resource your team with grinders, brewers, and machines and tampers and all the things they need to be successful at their job. And it comes back to when they're under pressure, like during COVID, I heard a story about your drive-through and cold brew, having tools to be able to pivot in the midst of trials is something that not a lot of shops have, but if you'd been in which you were kind of leaning into the value of just resourcing your team, it seems you kind of set them up for success and to be creative in that moment.
So coming back to the whole drive-through thing, right? When COVID first hit, everything was down. Nobody was really moving or going anywhere or inside a building. You weren't allowed to do any of that stuff. And so we looked at, okay, well, what skills do we have? And where can we apply those skills to move this operation further, right? We're trying to buy time, right? That was kind of our mindset. And so my partner is a general contractor. And so our Fair Oaks location, which is our busier cafe, we looked at, the given area. We don't have a built-in drive-through, but we have a really big parking lot, right? Parking's ample. And that parking lot was not used right when COVID started because, just people weren't really out. So we took that opportunity and we wanted to keep as many people employed as possible, and we wanted to keep this operation going, right? And so what we did was in the summer, we built some call it our shed. We have a little 4x8 little shack that we put out on one of the islands in the parking lot, and we developed a little loop around system with cones, and we had people come up to the little shed, place their order, loop around to the front of our cafe, and we took coolers we had these cold brew growlers and latte growlers that we actually had developed with at that time, it was a recent partnership. Looking back, it was a strategic partnership, right? Because with Ground Control, they helped us to develop a recipe for not only our cold brew, which right after COVID hit in the summer was pretty popular, and alongside that, they helped us develop a recipe for a latte growler, so people didn't necessarily have to come to our cafe more often, right? They were able to buy a half gallon at a time. And so, I guess mitigating the risk of exposure to anything, it helped people it gave them the confidence to come out every, few days or so. They'd buy a cold brew growler or a latte growler, and it'd last them a week or whatever it was, depending on how much they drank, And so Yeah, ground control was looking back definitely a strategic partnership that really helped us, I'd say, get through that first few months of COVID.
Yeah, that was a interesting time, and I always think about how a year before that, any quote unquote self-respecting third wave coffee person would never have thought about half gallons or growlers of lattes, and not laughed about it. But how many people pretty much throughout the industry were just like, that's a really good idea. We're gonna we're gonna do that. In
Yeah,
how
because
we
it
kind
allowed
of
them to pay the bills.
yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, there's some practicalities at work here for sure, and I love this idea of building in a time where it's really that, like when the pandemic hits, people were building, you're building, and you're doing that together. In the beginning of the conversation, you were talking about how you have to do this with other people. You can't do it alone, and it seems like now full circle to this time, what better example than having partnerships, than having a team where people are working together to creatively problem solve and really just, make it work.
Yeah, I mean, it was it really lit the fire under you, right? I mean, you really had no choice but to pivot, right? And I'm thankful I'm at the time in my life where I have the energy to be able to pivot quickly and make decisions quickly and adapt to things like COVID, right? Um, and giving that hope, I think, to our staff that okay, doesn't matter what's happened, doesn't really, as an entrepreneur, like you don't, I don't believe that I mean, the economy is important, right? What's happening is important, but I don't think it is the absolute the only thing that an entrepreneur looks at, right? They look for opportunity, right? It's a unique skill set, I think, where it allows you to see opportunities in times that others don't. I mean, I think that's what separates entrepreneurs, right? The level of entrepreneurs, rather.
I would agree with that, seeing opportunity to meet needs almost preemptively. Right now in your business, what are your plans for the future? I know you mentioned that you don't have like a 5-year vision or anything like that, but if I was to force an answer from you, like what is it that you're working on now that you're excited about for the future in the business?
Yeah, so I mean, we obviously you think ahead, right? There's some goals we're working towards, right? But I think the common like mindset that we have is like we're looking for strategic partners, right? Like we can't figure everything out ourselves. I don't believe that's the right angle to take it from, right? Try to figure out everything yourself and start it from scratch. And so leveraging what somebody else has done, over the last 10 years that it took for them to build their business, with ground control, for example, understanding how it can be a mutually beneficial like partnership.
Excellent. Paul, this has really been fun, and I have some more questions for you, but that will be on another recording, another interview that we're going to be hosting on the Voga Coffee website. So folks want to hear the rest of this, they can go to vogacoffee.com. But where can we find more information about Pause Coffee and visit you when we're in town?
Yeah, so on Instagram, you can find us on there at Pause Coffee House. And similarly on Facebook or Pause Coffee Company or pausecoffeehouse.com.
Excellent. Paul, thank you. It's really been cool to talk to you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, Chris.
Well, I think a couple things that really stand out to me in this conversation with Paul, it's the idea of being 1% better every day. I really love that concept. It's something that we can all try to do. It's not too big. And over time, as he said, there's a compound effect to that. But also working on the business operations as a way to facilitate the success of the people in the business. It's not going to come as a surprise to you that I really enjoyed that aspect of this conversation, but it's so critical. I think Paul made that clear. It's been critical to them, especially lately, as they've been navigating a lot of change. They've been navigating a lot of challenges, but they've had their partnerships, they've had their team, and they have been caring for those through the way that they care for the operations. So getting 1% better, focusing on operations as a way to care for others, really great messages and more here in this conversation. So huge thank you to Paul for joining us on this episode of the Thinking Differently series from Ground Control. If you want more information about Pause Coffee House, I would encourage you to go visit their website over at pausecoffee.house. And also you can find them on Instagram at Pause Coffee House. And of course, if you're in Sacramento for any reason, then definitely swing by and have the experience for yourself. Now, don't forget, over at groundcontrol.coffee/KTTS, we have the bonus episode with Paul, because we continue the conversation here and talk more about his advice to leaders and lessons that he's learned. He has some great insights to share with us. So be sure to check that out. Link is in the show notes for that. If you have any questions about this episode or any other episode, feel free to give me an email. That is chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that, that is the end of our second episode in the 3-part series on Thinking Differently, brought to you by Ground Control. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I hope it was enriching. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.